Before we get started this story about journalists upset at a lack of fact-checking, let me play for you the world's smallest violin. From Vox, what the Jill Abramson book scandal tells us about publishing's fact-checking problem. In book publishing, the onus for fact-checking is on the author. That creates a problem. My stars and garters, Vox! Have you not heard that people who live in glass houses should not be throwing stones? Now, I could be wrong, but it is my general understanding that Vox does not, in fact, employ fact-checkers. Nor, I do not believe they even disclose this in the article. Now, don't get me wrong. It's been a while since I've been to their office or talked to any of their people, but I do not believe they employ fact-checkers. But I will point out, Vice doesn't employ fact-checkers. I'm also pretty sure the Huffington Post doesn't. I'm pretty sure none of these companies do. In fact, there's very few organizations that actually do employ fact-checkers. In fact, the story here is that several writers from Vice, for instance, are upset that they were mischaracterized in Jill Abramson's book because she fact-checks herself. Oh, now you're upset. Please, how many times have I sent emails when that alternative influencer network garbage nonsense came out, and all of these outlets were publishing it when Vox was publishing it, and Vox didn't fact-check it, and I reached out to them. What did they do? Nothing. They ignored it. Why? Because they're scumbags. Normally, I don't like to insult people, but I'm going to tell you what right now, Vox, because I know people at Vox, I know many of the higher-ups there. If you're going to ignore me when I politely and respectfully ask you to correct the record on the lies you've published about me, and you won't do it, I'm going to go ahead and call you a scumbag when you write a story criticizing Jill Abramson because there's a fact-checking problem. Maybe, Vox, you should actually have some leadership and deal with the fact that you are completely inconsistent. That Ezra Klein would write that nonsense piece about the reactionary right because some garbage fake news was published by a partisan organization and he didn't fact-check any of it. And then you're going to go, oh heavens! Look at this, a scandal. It's so wrong for books not to fact-check. Yeah, pot, meat, kettle. Book publishing has a fact-checking problem. So do you. And that problem might have just caught up with former New York Times executive editor Jill Abramson. And allow me to point out, you! Pot, meat, kettle. Abramson's highly anticipated new book, Merchants of Truth, The Business of News and the Fight for Facts, is scheduled to publish at the beginning of February. But advanced copies have begun to circulate through the media, and more than one of the people featured in the book have disputed the facts and truth of Abramson's writing about facts and truth. It's really weird that you're so willing to talk about all of these people who are upset, but how many people have been upset over the fake news you've published, Vox, and you've not addressed it? Because you are bad people. Not individually, it's just a terrible organization. In a lengthy Twitter thread, journalist Arielle Duhaime-Ross cites a paragraph of Merchants of Truth pertaining to her work at Vice and says it contains 6 errors, including about her gender identity and her journalism background. I met Jill Abramson in June 17 in the Vice office. We chatted for less than 40 minutes. She took handwritten notes. I have not heard from her since, by which I mean she did not contact me for a fact check. Did you? Do you fact check? When I actually got a statement from a journalist who is in direct contact with the Data and Society group who made that fake news, he said they've confirmed the data in their report is actually misleading and incorrect. Where was the fact check? Where was you reaching out when I said, hey, by the way, Ezra Klein, you're producing fake news? They just ignore it. Aw, boo-hoo. You're now writing about how so upset you are over fact-checking? Please. How many people on the internet have had to deal with the fake news from The Verge, for instance, when they claimed Blair White was a white nationalist? And when Blair said, hey, that's not true, what did they do? They doubled down and made it even longer. And Verge is a Vox property. Please. World's smallest violin. These people do not... I swear to God. Ross's critique was echoed by many of her current and former colleagues at Vice, who focused on a portion of Abramson's book that characterizes the site as a scandalous and irresponsible news outlet, more focused on curating a certain image than on reporting the truth. I'll mention this too. According to Shane Smith, CEO of Vice, Vice News came to be what it was because of me. Normally, I wouldn't. I'm not someone who likes to, gloat or be a bragger or anything like that. But at an awards ceremony, someone asked Shane if they ever thought they'd be doing on-the-ground reporting, and Shane actually pointed me out, and this is after I quit, saying it wasn't until Tim Pool came we actually started doing this. And in fact, it took me months of negotiating to say, let's do live breaking on-the-ground reporting. And then it was actually, I flew to Turkey before they'd even hired me, and they hired me while I was in Turkey doing this live stream. It did really, really well, and then we continually did on-the-ground breaking stuff. Mostly, it was me before Vice News even started. Vice News then launches and brings on a bunch of people who weren't there at the time. When I started working for Vice doing news reporting, they did have branded Vice News, but there was no individual channel called Vice News. It was just content. They would put Vice News in the front. I started, and my understanding is that the reporting they did, which Abramson characterizes as salacious and irresponsible, is partly because of me, at least to a large extent. Many other people were involved in the creation of Vice News. I don't take credit for everything that it is, just that I kind of planted a seed early on. And it was like 6 months of negotiating. I talked to them in like November, and it wasn't until June I actually got brought on. So it was a long time of them saying we don't want to do news. The point is, I love how they're so upset about it. Yeah, maybe they could have asked me about what goes on at Vice, and I could have talked about it, and then I probably would just say, okay, the point I'm trying to make is, if I had ended up as one of these people who had been mischaracterized, or if I were to take issue with how she describes Vice, and I probably would, it's just another in a long line of instances where Vox and others have lied, partly about me, and many others, and have done nothing to fact-check it. Welcome to the internet, Vox and other Vice correspondents. Danny Gold, a video journalist who is now at PBS NewsHour, I know Danny, and who previously worked at Vice, writes that Abramson misrepresented his decision not to wear protective clothing while covering an Ebola clinic in Africa. Abramson portrays Gold's decision as dangerously reckless, in contrast to safer decisions made by reporters for the New York Times while covering the same story, who she says wore protective clothing the whole time. But Gold says it's inaccurate. And I'm going to say this. I have a very minor beef with Danny for the most part. We're rather neutral towards each other. But Danny has posted some questionable things about me, saying that I, among others, had now become entrenched in the alt-right. And I said, what? And then he backed up. Oh, no, I just mean like you interviewed them. I'm like, I interviewed 2 people? That's what you're saying? Please, absolutely insane. And then he also retweeted something that was, I was making a point about how people try to blame entire groups for the actions of individuals. And I pointed that out about Charlottesville, and then him, as well as many other leftists, started screen grabbing and acting like it was a defense of white nationalism. And I'm like, you're literally taking my comments out of context to misrepresent me. And I messaged him, I was like, dude, are you joking, man? This is a critique of how they blame all Muslims. Like, do you understand the point? And they're like, oh, we just don't care. Like, he didn't say this. The point is, the way they respond to me being like, you realize the point of that tweet, right? Is, oops, oh. They take something out of context and then make claims about it. These people, they do this all the time. Okay, other publications, Teen Vogue, this woman takes a clip from me, retweets it, she takes a screen grab, and then she makes a comment changing the context of what I'm talking about. Then it gets thousands of retweets, and then people I know just share it. Why? Because they're tribalists. They don't care about what's real. They are evil people. Vox, I have very little respect for you because you do things like this. Also on Twitter, J. Caspian Kang, formerly of Vice, now at the New York Times, noted that Abramson says Charlottesville's in North Carolina. That's a minor factual error, and it's completely... who cares? And Vice's L. Reeve notes that a figure Abramson describes as a Southern white nationalist is in fact from Long Island. Minor factual errors should be corrected, don't get me wrong. I reached out to Abramson and her publisher, Simon & Schuster, for comment and was directed to Abramson's statement on Twitter. There, Abramson wrote that the screen caps of her book currently circulating are from uncorrected galleys and not from the finished version. The book isn't even out yet, which will not come out until February 5th. It was after Abramson's statement that Duhaime Ross updated her Twitter thread with citations from the finished version of the book. I've requested a copy of the finished book from the publisher and will update the story upon receiving it, but the book isn't even out yet. Let's just wrap up. You know what, man? This is uncharacteristic. I'm uncharacteristically angry because, you know, I don't normally heavily criticize people or insult them, calling Vox scumbags, especially when I know some of the higher-ups and the people who work there. But you know what? I'm just sick of it. I'm sick of... I used to talk to these people. I used to hang out with them in New York. And they started posting lies about me. Why? Because they're, in my opinion, sick. They're sick in the head, okay? They need clicks, they need traffic, and they justify the evil lies the sick behavior of publishing false information about people. Most notably, I'll cite it. Again, they've lied about me. But when they called Blair White a white nationalist, please, Blair White is a trans conservative, not a white nationalist. But what do they do instead of correcting? Nothing. And when I politely say, hey, just a heads up, I think you've got a factual error that I hope you can fix, they ignore it. And many other publications do the exact same thing. So I'm going to end by saying this, Vox. The absolutely hilarious issue you're taking with fact-checking is a complete and utter farce. My understanding is you don't have fact-checkers. I could be wrong. Maybe you do. And if you don't, maybe you should. Because you get things wrong all the time. Yeah, plain and simple. Whatever. Stick around. I got more videos coming up. Yeah, I'm pissed off.